All right, guys. You're about ready. Welcome to our home. Thanks for having us. Trey, you can get the proceedings begun.
All right. Welcome to the great JFK Debate. It is between the great Landon McDonald and the somewhat decent Dallas Jenkins. Very excited. No, there's I am Trey Morris, your unbiased and loving moderator. Tonight we will be debating whether JFK was assassinated by a single, crazy, seemingly improbable assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, or some sort of other conspiracy. We will begin with the overview and quick statements by each of the participants. We will go back and forth, and then we will be discussing 4 different topics and then having a conclusion. So, Mr. Jenkins, the floor is yours.
Thank you. What we're going to do is I'm going to tell you literally my impression of what happened with no spin or getting into the different theories. And then Landon will do the same, and then I'll make my opening statement about all the theories. John F. Kennedy, as you know, November 22nd, 1963, comes to Dallas. And this chart here shows the motorcade route that he went down. So at approximately 12:29, 12:30 or so, when he turned here, it is not disputed that at least 3 shots rang out on this street. Okay? The first shot missed. The second shot, according to me, hit Kennedy in the back, upper back, exited his throat, went through and hit John Connally, governor, in the front seat. Right under here, his shoulder came out his front, landed, broke through his wrist and landed in his thigh. And the third shot came about 4 seconds later from behind, hitting him right in the back of the head, blowing his head off, this side here. And at that point, Secret Service agent was jumping onto the car, and the car sped up and ran and got away. And they took Kennedy to the hospital, where he was shortly pronounced dead after they tried to revive him. And then he was taken by Secret Service, put in a coffin, taken by Secret Service back to Washington, D.C. Lee Harvey Oswald, at this time, after firing the 3 shots from this Texas School Depository, I will take you back for a second. Lee Harvey Oswald owned a Mannlicher Carnico rifle that he had purchased. It's actually Carnico. Yeah, I thought it was Carnico. Yes. He had a rifle that he had purchased through the mail under an alias, A. Hadell. He purchased a rifle and a handgun. There is a famous picture of him holding that rifle in one hand, having his handgun in his pocket or in his, at his waist on the other side. And it was a picture that he was sending to a communist organization trying to get some legitimacy, trying to show them how tough he was. That is the same rifle that was used to shoot at a man named General Walker several months prior. This was a strong anti-communist, uber extreme right-winger. Lee Harvey Oswald went to his house, took several scoped out photographs, and then one night left a note for his wife and a key to a safety deposit box for the last $150 that he had. Went and shot at General Walker. It actually hit a window frame, and the bullet that was found was ultimately traced back to the gun that was used for the assassination. And they also ended up finding Oswald's notes and pictures that he was taking when he did that action. It did not kill Walker. It deflected off the windshield, not the windshield, the door frame, window frame, and Walker survived. So that same gun was found in the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, where Lee Harvey Oswald had gotten a job 2 months previous through the woman who was hosting Lee Harvey Oswald's wife, who he was separated from at the time. So she was living with a woman with her baby, and the woman got him this job at this Texas School Depository about a month and a half before the assassination. So he goes up to the floor about 12:10, 12:15, sets up a bunch of boxes, so that when you got onto that floor, you couldn't see his nest. They found a bunch of boxes that were arranged in a sniper's nest format, where they found his fingerprints, and they found 3 bullet shell casings on the ground as well. There were 2 men underneath on the 5th floor who during the shooting heard 3 shots come from over their head. There were several witnesses who saw Lee Harvey Oswald do this. After the shooting, Lee Harvey Oswald exits the school book depository, gets on a bus, takes the bus for about 5 minutes, the bus gets caught in traffic, gets out of the bus, gets into a taxi cab. These are all indisputed facts. Gets into a taxi cab, takes a taxi to within about 2 blocks of the boarding house where he was staying, goes to the boarding house. He is seen by the manager there going into his room. He puts on a jacket, comes out of the jacket, walks down the sidewalk. As he's walking down the sidewalk, a cop walks up because the cop had heard a description of Lee Harvey Oswald. And Lee matched the description, calls Lee Harvey Oswald over, and then at this point, between 4 and 7 witnesses saw Lee Harvey Oswald shoot Tippit 3 times in the body, came around the car and shot him in the head while he was lying on the ground. Then at this point, Oswald leaves, rushes, drops the gun, keeps the gun, drops the bullets, takes the gun with him, drops his jacket at a gas station parking lot, runs down the street. As cops are coming by, he keeps ducking in and out. A guy suspects him, is wondering why he's ducking in and out, follows him, sees him duck into a theater, the Texas Theater, where he sits down into a movie without having paid for it. The guy says to the manager, did that guy pay for a ticket? She says no. He calls the police. Police show up, go into the theater, confront Oswald. He pulls a gun, hits the officer with his gun, gets subdued, taken into custody. At this point, he gets taken to the police station, where they do a lineup to see if he matches the description of the suspect who killed the cop. So over the wires they were saying, several witnesses just saw a cop. 2 guys went to J.D. Tippett's police car, got on the radio and said, we're citizens, but we just saw this man kill J.D. Tippett. He's 5'10", thin, wearing these clothes. So the police were looking for that guy, Lee Harvey Oswald, match it, take him to the police station. Several people identify him in the lineup as the cop killer. While they're holding him, the other cops at the police station had heard that the Texas School Book Depository was missing 1 employee. Because they'd heard of the shots coming from the depository, they went to the depository, gather all the employees. 1 is missing, Lee Harvey Oswald, matched the description of the witnesses who'd seen him. And so now they're looking for Lee Harvey Oswald. Says to a cop, the police chief says to the cop, I need you to go find a Lee Harvey Oswald. He lives at this place. The guy says, he's right over here. He's the one we grabbed for the cop shooting. So, oh wow, great, perfect. And so at that point, they started to announce on television, we've got the killer, here's his gun. His foot, they did a quick fingerprint analysis, matched it. They immediately traced the gun, traced it back to Oswald. So at that point, 2 days later, on Sunday, November 24th, while Lee Harvey Oswald was being transferred from one jail to another, he was walking out through a hallway into a car. Jack Ruby came up and shot him in the stomach and killed him. And Jack Ruby was immediately arrested, of course, and to this day, he died about 3 years later. And that, of course, Jack Ruby's killing of Lee Harvey Oswald is what gave birth to the fact that there was a conspiracy, that surely someone must have, he was covering for someone else. And so those are the mostly undisputed facts, but mixed in with a few of my own. That's my position. I do believe in the lone gunman theory. There was no conspiracy. There was no second gunman. Lee Harvey Oswald did not work for anybody, was not hired by anybody. Came across several people who were nefarious characters at different times, but there is no evidence of that they worked together. So, Landon, you can now give your analysis.
Great. So on November 22nd, 1963, the president, John F. Kennedy, was assassinated in Dealey Plaza, and I do agree with most of the things that Dallas just said. So John F. Kennedy was coming to Texas because he wanted to get elected to a second term, and his polls were showing that he was low in Texas. And one of the problems was that his vice president, Lyndon Johnson, was supposed to be big in Texas, but he wasn't anymore, according to polls. So they came to Texas on this 3-day trip. They went to 3 cities, and the second city, as far as I remember, they went to is Dallas. And so they were driving around the city. Near the end of the parade route, they came down Main Street. They turned right onto Houston. And they made a left turn onto Elm, and I'm going to talk about that turn in a little bit. When they got to about here, there were 3 shots from the Texas School Book Depository, and either 1 or 2 shots that came from the grassy knoll, somewhere right around here. And the main reasons that I think that there were shots from the grassy knoll is because of witness testimony and because of the Zapruder film. And John F. Kennedy, the back of his head exploded out, and Jackie climbed onto the back of the car to find a piece of his fragmented skull that had blown out the back of his car. And they drove to Parkland Hospital, where they did the autopsy, and then his body was illegally removed by the Social Security and moved to another city. And then a lot of weird stuff happened. And Lee Harvey Oswald, well, I probably should just say this. The John F. Kennedy assassination is like a little bit like the Trinity. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. Like I understand the Trinity, but I also don't. Do you know what I mean? Like, I know it and I believe in it. And it makes sense to me, but it also doesn't. Because God intentionally made the Trinity mysterious, and I like that about God. The John F. Kennedy assassination is very mysterious, and I don't completely understand it. Only one person here tonight thinks and believes firmly that they completely understand it. And that is this man that you see before you right here. So all that I believe is that there is a conspiracy. Now, I think there's some merit to the CIA conspiracy. I think there's some merit to the mob conspiracy. I think there's some merit to the government cover-up. And part of me believes that all of those were somehow working together. I don't completely know what happened, but I know that something happened, and I know that there was a second shooter. So after that, they took him to Parkland, and then they illegally removed his body. Lyndon Johnson was declared president. Lee Harvey Oswald left the Texas School Book Depository, and went, just like Dallas said, went over, blah, 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 went and, supposedly shot J.D. Tippit, and we're going to get into that later, and then he was arrested. And then the next day, he was shot by
2 days later.
2 days later. Thank you. He was shot by Jack Ruby, and that's what happened.
So, why do we have conspiracy theories, particularly in this case? We have witnesses who.
This is opening statements.
Yeah. So that was our baseline of what happened to kind of get you caught up on what the 2 theories are. There are. What was I saying? Oh yeah.
Switching already.
Dave went from on the fence to conspiracy. Why does a conspiracy even exist in this case? Where did it start? Obviously, we have a man who's shot 3 times in a very crowded place. Landon agrees that there were anywhere between 80 and 120 people there, multiple witnesses. And 3 shots were fired, 3 bullet shells are found, a gun with fingerprints on it, a crazy guy, they trace him back, it all adds up. Why do we even have a conspiracy? And my contention is that it is very difficult for us to reason that something so significant could be so out of balance. When 7 million Nazis are murdered, it's balanced out on the other side by, 7 million Jews are murdered. It's balanced out by the massive evil and size and scope of the Nazi regime. 9/11 happens, another random act of evil that has no explanation, but it's balanced out by the size and scope of Islamic fundamentalism. It's very difficult to comprehend why a massive event like this, an icon of a figure, could be part of such an impact of history based on a loser. Lee Harvey Oswald was a loser. He never succeeded in any part of his life. He grew up without a father. He went to the Marine Corps and was dishonorably discharged because of his temper and his resistance to authority. He went from job to job. He went to Russia for 3 years because he was trying to defect. They didn't want him. And then he ended up saying, I don't like this, I'm going to go back to America, comes to America, and again, can't get work, can't find, he marries a Russian woman, she doesn't like him very much, They separate. I mean, the guy had never gotten a break, and it's hard to imagine that a loser like that, a 25-year-old nobody, could impact the course of history. And it's really interesting if you look through the decades at what the predominant conspiracy theories were. They tend to reflect what our fears were at the time. So in the 1960s, our biggest fears were Russia, Cold War. We were afraid at any moment that we could be attacked. And so when the president is killed, first thing we think of is must be the Russians. And then of course Lee Harvey Oswald lived in Russia for 3 years. He was a Marxist. He was on camera as being a Marxist. He had been very proud of his Marxism and his anti-government philosophies in America. And but as that started to go away because they started to realize as these conspiracy theories came up that, well, why would the Russians do something so foolish, ignite a Cold War, and why would they use someone so meaningless and such a nobody and someone who's so innocuous as Lee Harvey Oswald for the job? Then we go to the 70s, and what's the predominant theory? It's the government. It had to be the government, the Warren Commission. They made mistakes. And at the 70s was when Watergate happened, when Vietnam War was happening. We were distrusting our government. Therefore, of course, because of our fears of government, the government must have been involved. So the Warren Commission, who was brought about right after the assassination to investigate, spent 10 months, came up with the lone gunman theory, and concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone with no conspiracy. But they must have been in on it too. They must have been covering something up. Our government does that. Before 1963, we didn't think that too often.
Does that mean in the 80s it'll be a boy band?
Yeah. That's why New Kids on the Block were thought of. But so in the 70s, it was our fear of government. Then that started to go away too, because the House Elections Committee, as a result of the distrust of the Warren Commission, was formed. The government formed another commission to look at it. We don't trust the Warren Commission, you guys do it. And they, of course, came to the same conclusion that the Warren Commission did, with one exception, which we'll cover later. They did believe that there was a fourth shot from the grassy knoll, which then indicates a conspiracy. Well, in the 80s, the mob. The movies like The Godfather had, in the late 70s, movies like Scarface and Raging Bull, and started to give rise to popular, we started to believe in the mob as this underworld crime syndicates. The movie Untouchables came out, and of course in the 80s that started to become a very prominent theory, that the mob was involved in the Kennedy assassination, that Jack Ruby must have been working for the mob, and that's who he was covering for, was when he killed Lee Harvey Oswald, he was covering for the mob. And the 90s came about, and the 90s was the decade of we challenge everything. Generation X doesn't believe in anything. We don't believe in anything or anybody. And JFK, the movie, comes out, and that has that idea. Everyone was in on it. There were 9 people in Dealey Plaza. Oswald didn't even fire a shot. Everything you know is wrong. As it says in the movie, black is white, white is black. You can't trust anybody or anything. That really fit into the decade of the 90s, Generation X. We don't believe in anybody or anything. We're going to challenge it. What Landon just said. I don't know who did it. I can't. But I know something was off. Someone did something. There had to be a conspiracy. And that has led now to, even now in the last couple of years, popular theories that LBJ was part of it. And that reflects, of course, what's been happening in our distrust of presidents. George W. Bush and Barack Obama, they're lying to us. Presidents lie. They get lied to all the time, and LBJ was a liar. He must have been a liar too. So what I think is important to realize, though, as we go through this debate, it's been 50 years. 50 years since this happened. 49 years since the Warren Commission came out. In this time, 49 to 50 years, not one theory has held water. Not one theory has been officially established as the likely theory, other than the lone gunman. 2 massive government panels were brought about. They brought up independent pathologists, they brought in independent lawyers. The notion that they were part of this massive conspiracy and they were trying to cover it up as well, it was very difficult to accept. And you'll find that in these 50 years, no one has come forward. There's no one who has come forward and said, I was part of it. Other than, obviously, that some people who believe in aliens or people who...
30 seconds.
Right. So no one has come forward. So when you'll hear lots of questions from Landon, lots of, this guy knew this guy and that must mean something, but you're not going to hear any hard evidence that anybody shot John F. Kennedy other than Lee Harvey Oswald. And I will freely acknowledge that if Landon can show that there was a gunman on the grassy knoll, or that Jack Ruby was covering for somebody, I lose. It doesn't matter exactly what the conspiracy is. I'm claiming there was no conspiracy.
Landon, your opening statement?
I already finished mine, I'm done.
Okay. The first topic is Lee Harvey Oswald. Landon, you get the opening statement.
Great. So, just let whatever's happening.
Oh, it's okay. Just wait, Louie. There's little people coming in.
Just with my...
Hello.
Little people, midgets here?
Is there a midget theory?
You ready, Landon?
All right, we're going to get started here with the first topic, which is who is Lee Harvey Oswald? And I guess that's the question that most people really want to answer. Can you guys see? I can move this lamp over for you. I want to make sure you guys can see. Is that a little better? Can you guys see the screen?
Yes.
If you can't see the screen, I'm going to be reading a lot of the stuff that's on there. I want to make sure you can see it. If you can see it, that'd be great. So the question is, who is Lee Harvey Oswald? Like Dallas said, Lee Harvey Oswald grew up without a dad, blah, blah, blah. So did a lot of people. And like he was, really sad, like a lot of people, blah, that's fine. So here's the big questions about Lee Harvey Oswald. Why did he defect to Russia? You know how, you'll notice how Dallas glossed over that fact. The reason that he glossed over that fact is because that's a big deal. And he doesn't want to talk about it. Because not many people defect to Russia. And not many people in the late 1950s defect in Russia. Was anyone here? I won't shame you for being old. Was anyone here alive in the late 1950s? I don't think anybody was. In America in the late 1950s, like Dallas said, it was the Cold War. It was a very scary time. Russia was considered enemy number one. Russia was Osama bin Laden from 2007. That's what Russia was in the 1950s. So a person defecting to Russia is not a small thing. It's not an insignificant thing. Dallas tried to paint him as, he went over to try Russia and they didn't want him and they came back. But I don't see it like that. I see it very differently than that. I see it as Oswald potentially was a person who worked for the CIA and was sent over to Russia by them. One of the reasons I believe this, I'm going to come back to this in a sec. Look at the third point down here. If Oswald had no government help, how did he and his wife, I miswrote that, I just meant to write he, how did he receive his visa to enter Russia in 48 hours? So typically when people would go to defect to another country, and when he first went, he didn't denounce his citizenship. I want to make that clear. He was just going for a visit. In the late 1950s, it would typically take 5 to 7 days for a person to get a visa to enter Russia, especially from America, which is considered an enemy country. Oswald received his visa in less than 48 hours, which is just unprecedented. It's not normal. That didn't happen with anyone else. As far as I understand, there are no other cases where that happened. And what that suggests to you is, did they make a mistake in Soviet Russia? I don't think so. I think that he had CIA help in getting in, and I think they sent him over there for some missions. Let me go back here. Sorry about that. Why did he defect to Russia? That's a big question. And then why was he videotaped at a political rally in Mexico weeks before? I'm going to come back to that in a sec. So, on March 22nd, 1978, former CIA accountant James B. Wilcott swore under oath before the House Select Committee on Assassinations that he believed that Lee Harvey Oswald was a regular employee of the Central Intelligence Agency and that he believed Oswald received a full-time salary. Now that's not just a random person that works at the CIA. That's who? The accountant. Now, if you wanted to find out which people were actually on payroll at Harvest Bible Chapel, you wouldn't go to James, would you? Because he doesn't have the privilege of knowing everybody that's on staff. You would go to the person that works at HR. Who works for the CIA? You'd go to the HR person. Now, this guy, what's his name here? James Wilcott, he was the accounting person for the CIA. So his testimony that Oswald was receiving a paycheck from them must hold a lot of weight. Wasn't just a thing that was thrown off in a magazine interview. This isn't a friend saying, I heard him say that. He swore this under oath before the House Selections Assassinations Committee. I think you see the weight of that statement. Here's a letter from J. Edgar Hoover, marked December 12th. It's a little too small, so let me just read it for you guys. J. Edgar Hoover was the person who was in charge of the CIA. I said I personally believe Oswald was the assassin. The second aspect, as to whether he was the only man, gives me great concern. We have several letters, not in the report because we were not going to be able to prove it, written to him from Cuba referring to the job he was going to do. So that's the director of the CIA in a written letter that he knew would be saved, sending to a coworker about the job he was going to do. Now, if that's not people knowing about something beforehand, I really don't know what is. Here's a quote to just show the ridiculousness of Dallas claiming that Oswald is kind of just a normal guy who got upset and decided he wanted to shoot someone. I don't believe he was a lone nut. His background is deeply suspicious. Can we really believe a guy working as a radar technician on the U-2 spy plane project, the most secret thing on the planet in the late 50s, was studying Russian and Marxism while he was in the Marine Corps? He then gives up his American way and heads off to Moscow through London and Helsinki. He spends time in a Soviet mental institution, gets a job in a sheet metal factory in Minsk, marries a KGB colonel's daughter, and is given a Soviet hunting license. He then becomes disenchanted with Marxist-Leninist life, packs his bags, and returns to Texas. 3 weeks before the assassination, he goes to Mexico City and visits the Russian and the Cuban legislations, and shortly after gets the job at the Texas School Book Depository. As you can see, when you conglomerate everything that supposedly Lee Harvey Oswald did, he's not just a normal person. He's not just a person who was by himself. He had his hands in everything. He was everywhere. So here he is. So who do you believe that this man was? Dallas believes that he was a lone assassin. I believe that he was probably a CIA operative who got hooked up with disenchanted ex-CIA people, as we're going to find out later. John F. Kennedy said in a public statement that he was going to tear the CIA into 1,000 pieces. That's a big problem for a government agency. That's a big problem. He also fired the head of the CIA at that time. Oswald possibly could have known those people, and there could have been, and I believe there was, a conspiracy involving those people and possibly people in the mob to assassinate the president. If Lee Harvey Oswald... Oh, that's the next thing. Sorry about that. And I'm finished.
Your response, Dallas?
Well, yeah, I'm giving my opening statement.
No, it's still a response to Lee Harvey Oswald.
I
These
don't
are rules. Just go by them, okay?
For sure, I don't believe that. I don't believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was normal by any means. Of course, he did have a very checkered past. It is true that Lee Harvey Oswald went to Russia for 3 years, as I mentioned. Some of Landon's discussion about Lee Harvey Oswald in that time is very interesting for a CIA operative. It begs the question of why he couldn't hold a job there, why nothing seemed to go well for him over there. I'm not sure what kind of evidence that he would have procured, what he was doing. It was very odd. He ended up marrying, that's where he met his future wife in Russia, brought her back. Again, there was no evidence of any kind of nefarious activity. He came back to the States after 3 years, again, disillusioned with how the communist philosophy ended up being not being practical. That is for sure true. I'm going to take you further, though, than that. He mentioned that he got a job at the School Book Depository. What seems to be glossed over all the time when they talk about this is the incredible coincidence that it would have been for Lee Harvey Oswald to be assigned by the CIA to kill President Kennedy. Because when he went to Russia and then came back, then what? He was a CIA operative living in New Orleans, and he moved to Dallas, and then he went to Mexico City to try to get it to Cuba, was denied by the Russians and the Cubans. There's lots of evidence of his visit to the embassy, the Soviet embassy in Mexico City, trying to get to Cuba because he wanted to help Castro. For a guy who was supposedly able to get into Russia in 48 hours, and that he was clearly helped by the CIA, it really begs the question why he couldn't get into Cuba. He spent 3 weeks in Mexico City trying to get into Cuba and trying to get a visa there, couldn't. And multiple witnesses have him as being very upset, very distraught. Going back to Dallas, gets a job at the school book depository before Kennedy had even announced the motorcade route. He wasn't even announced that he was coming to Dallas until September. And Oswald was already living in Dallas. So if Kennedy had never come to Dallas, how would Lee Harvey Oswald have been the assassin? He wouldn't have had opportunity to kill the president. It was quite a coincidence that it was quite an impressive guessing game by the CIA if he was an operative, that he was able to get to Dallas, and then magically Kennedy gets assigned to visit, and then before the motorcade route is even announced, he gets a job at the school book depository. It's pretty coincidental and pretty amazing guesswork by the CIA. Now, Landon mentioned James. I'm going to save the James Wolcott for my rebuttal. So here's the thing: leading up into the assassination, wouldn't we believe that if Lee Harvey Oswald was working for anybody, that there would be some indication in the weeks leading up to the assassination, including the announcement that Kennedy was coming to Dallas, including the announcement of the motorcade, that someone would have discovered in the last 50 years any indication of him meeting with someone, receiving a phone call, any increased chatter of any kind that indicates that something's about to happen. Nothing. He was living in a boarding house, and according to the people who ran the boarding house, he was there every night at 6 o'clock watching TV and hanging out in his room doing nothing. Nothing came in the weeks leading up to the assassination. Nothing came in the days after the assassination. There was no, among the CIA, among the Russians, Landon went through a lot of different theories. Again, nothing stands out. Nothing, it's like, well, it could have been the CIA, it could have been the Russians, we're not really sure. And his evidence of working at the CIA was the testimony of one man, which I'll get into in a moment. So, the fact is, Lee Harvey Oswald gets to this Texas School Book Depository as a loser. There's no evidence of any kind that he was anything but a loser. There is evidence, of course, that he was abnormal. Nothing that he was a loser. It's a very odd job, a very odd choice for the CIA. I don't know how Landon explains why the CIA chose someone who was such a weirdo when he was in the Marines. Was that part of the plan all along? Was he recruited into the Marines by the CIA? And back then, even back when he was 20, 21 years old, they had him act really bizarre all along. So they were setting up a 7-year plot to kill the president. If this was a conspiracy that started, that ended with Lee Harvey Oswald shooting the president because he worked for the CIA, it had to have started a long time before. And that whole plan must have been from the time he was 18 years old. All right, you're going to act like a whack job all the time. And you're going to get kicked out of the Marines, but it'll all be a cover. It's all a cover so that when we finally decide to kill the president, who wasn't president at these times that Landon's talking about, John F. Kennedy wasn't even the president. So where did this conspiracy start? How did it begin?
30 seconds.
Yeah, I'll wrap up with that.
Okay. Your rebuttal, Landon?
I didn't say that I think the CIA did it. I said that I think it was ex-CIA people, and I see the same facts as Dallas just said, representing a complete alternate reality. When he says that it's a good guess by the CIA that he was going to be there, I see it in the exact opposite way. I think, well, if he worked there, how ridiculous that it would have driven right by, and not just that it would have driven right by here, but that they would have made this turn that, according to the Social Security, was an illegal left turn because it's a 110-degree turn, and the car had to slow down too much, had to slow down below what was the typical legal rate for the president to be driving. It just seems an absolutely ridiculous choice that they wouldn't continue straight down Main Street, but that they would go this way. So when Dallas says that it was a good guess by them, I see that in the completely opposite way. I see it as completely implicating them, and I'm sure that you do as well. And then a couple other things. Dallas said that he was sitting...
Oh, wait, let me go move my tag.
Dallas said that he was sitting in his room every night. Just because he was the person pulling the trigger doesn't mean he was the person planning it all the way up. So just because he was the person up there pulling the trigger doesn't mean that he was involved in all of the planning. It just doesn't mean that. So the fact that he was sitting in his room every night doesn't mean that it wasn't a plot by other people. He could have been brought in later. it's funny that Dallas is painting him like a loser now, because right now, Lee Harvey Oswald being a loser serves his purposes of the lone gunman. But in a second, when we're talking about the actual shooting, Lee Harvey Oswald, in Dallas's mind, is going to turn from a loser into the perfect shot, who is able to create a shot so difficult that people in the 60s could not recreate it. And right now it serves Dallas that he's a loser. In a second, he's going to become an outstanding marksman. Dallas said nothing went well for him over there in the Soviet Union, and that's not true, because he got married to a KGB colonel's daughter. Additionally, there's records of Lee Harvey Oswald staying in very, very nice hotels when he was in the Soviet Union. And if you understand what communism is like, staying in a very nice hotel is not like what it is here. It's even more of a luxury because everyone had the same things. And I don't think that that's accurate, that nothing went well for him over there. Dallas also said, quote, there was no nefarious activity while Lee Harvey Oswald was in Russia. I also disagree with that, because an American U-2 spy plane was shot down while Oswald was in Russia, which is the same project that he was working on in America. Now, that makes sense to me, because he could potentially have been sent over there by the CIA to intentionally leak secrets so the CIA could gain something against Russia that they were looking to gain in the Cold War. It all clicks really well to me. It really makes sense.
30 seconds.
And then one more thing Dallas said. Oh, I'll get to that later. Okay, I'm done.
Okay, a lot of things to respond to. CIA. Landon just said, I don't think it was CIA, I think it was ex-CIA. And yet somehow they knew the parade route in advance before the president even did. I'm not sure how ex-CIA, if they were that ex, would then have the ability to manipulate the parade route. He mentions this illegal turn. Trey can verify that the reason that they made that turn is because that is the only way to get to the trademark, which is where they were headed. This main street, correct, does not
That
take
is true.
Does not take them to the trademark, so that's why they made that illegal left turn. James Wilcott, I didn't have this written down because I didn't know that Landon would use him because he conveniently left out that Wilcott, the guy who testified that he thought Oswald probably worked for the CIA, was dismissed by the committee. James P. Wilcott, a former CIA financial officer, and this is from the testimonies and documents in 1978, claimed that while stationed in Japan after the assassination, he heard that Oswald had worked for the CIA under a special code designation and had been paid from a secret fund for deep cover operations. This is from an actual, that quote right there is from one of the books that believes in conspiracy. Wilcott admitted he never reported the allegations because he considered the information unreliable hearsay. That's from his testimony. In his testimonies, when he's questioned by the House Select Committee in 1978, he could not remember Oswald's special cryptonym or the project name from which the disbursements allegedly came. There is no evidence of Lee Harvey Oswald ever having money. He was dirt poor by the time he died. He left all his money to his wife, and there was $160. He lived in a boarding house. There was never an indication in the years leading up to his death that he had ever had any money. He went from job to job to job to job, not the actions of an undercover CIA officer or an ex-CIA officer. CIA employees who served with Wilcott testified Oswald had no contacts to the agency. They reputed Wilcott's tale. An intelligence analyst with whom Wilcott claimed to have a conversation about Oswald was not even posted overseas at the time. The Select Committee concluded, based on all the evidence, Wilcott's allegation was not worthy of belief. So the committee that he was testifying to, and it would seem odd too, that if he was part of the CIA, of all the people that he worked with, only one came forward, and that guy said, I heard that he worked for the CIA. I'm not sure. I heard about it. Seems very strange.
30 seconds.
Landon said, well, him sitting at home doesn't mean he was part of the assassination or the planning of it. He could have been brought in later. What does later mean? The day before? There again, no evidence whatsoever of him being contacted by anybody. He was poor. He didn't have a cell phone back then. Where was he making calls? How did he make this happen? How did they contact him? Is there any evidence of that whatsoever? There is no evidence that anyone from the CIA ever contacted him. He claimed that they couldn't recreate the shot. This is demonstratively false. The three shots that Oswald did, and we'll get into this later, have been recreated dozens of times by dozens of shooters, including today, with the exact same rifle.
Landon, your last rebuttal?
I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good.
You have a minute and a half, Dallas, for your last rebuttal.
You also mentioned at one time, you said he got disillusioned with Marxist life in Russia. Again, why would it matter if he was disillusioned with it if he was working for the CIA the whole time? I'm not sure what the point of even like his state of mind. I also am not sure the fact that he married a daughter of a KGB colonel. What was her reason for wanting to go back to Dallas and then live with a guy who beat her, and then they separated. She was reported multiple times how much upset she was with him, how she hated her marriage with him. He hit her. I mean, was she just? I'm just curious. That theory has not been a well-known theory that she was somehow connected to the KGB herself, and then therefore, like, what was your explanation for what happened in America once she married Oswald?
I don't even know what you're asking. Why did she come to America?
You brought up that she was the daughter of a KGB.
I think his point was that he wasn't a complete and total loser over there. If he was able to get into a social class where he could marry someone like that, that was the only point.
That was my point. If you're asking why she stayed with him, I don't know. Why does anyone stay in a relationship like that?
Well, if the whole notion is that this was all part of the plot, this was all arranged, so many of the actions once they got to America and when they were in America, they didn't. It's not like once she married him, he was living high society life. They didn't move into a nice apartment that a KGB person was living to, and he lived in a grungy apartment and then attempted suicide at one point while he was over there. At one point, while he was staying in a hotel, they came in, found him in the bathtub with his wrist slit. So all very strange actions for a CIA operative who's part of a massive conspiracy to kill President Kennedy, who wasn't president at the time. Trying to think of. I think that's it for Lee.
You're good. All right, that's in the first topic, Lee Harvey Oswald. The second topic will be a combination of the grassy knoll shot or the kill shot.
And do we want to? Anyone ask any questions or?
Oh, do we want to do questions? Yeah. I forgot about questions.
Well,
Are there any questions regarding Lee Harvey Oswald?
when do we want to hear about the logical fallacies?
This would be a good time now.
The only logical fallacy.
So just in case, no, James here is going to be our logic police, and he will be commenting after each topic. Any logical fallacies that have occurred, take it away, Pastor James.
The only logical fallacy in that whole argument was the final thing that Dallas said is classic straw man argumentation, which is where you caricature the argument of your opponent and then you destroy the caricature. So Landon just said, there could be any kind of conspiracy, I'm not really sure, and Dallas said, it's all one big, massive conspiracy, so you take the argument of your opponent, you make it into something he didn't say, and then you destroy what he didn't say.
Yeah.
So,
just to be clear, what I
he
said,
didn't say that it was one big, all conspiracy.
No, what I meant was, I was referring to the CIA specifically. Because obviously for the CIA to pull off the killing of the President of the United States, the complexity with which that would happen, the fine-tuned, would be unprecedented.
You can believe that Oswald was recruited to something to do with the CIA. You can believe that without believing that this was all going on for 10 years before Kennedy was ever president, You don't have to believe that Oswald knew all this when he went to Russia to believe that eventually those roads merged.
But I also I don't agree with what you just said. You said that if the CIA did this, it would have to be this very complex thing. Why does it have to be so complex when they're doing it, but it has to be so simple when he's doing it? Why is that?
Well, that's exactly my point. For a conspiracy to work over the course of 50 years, and for no one to know about it, and for no one to come forward with it, even his contention, well, he might have worked for the CIA, even if one person believed that he might have worked for the CIA, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that the CIA decided that they were going to kill the President of the United States. And so
For sure, that's true.
It's for sure, it's much easier for me to believe that a guy who was notoriously hateful towards the President and towards the United States government, and that was the point that I wanted to make about how he got the job at the School Book Depository. He was separated from his wife. She was living with a woman named Ruth Payne, or a couple named the Paynes. And Ruth Payne, when Lee Harvey Oswald came back from Mexico City frustrated and depressed, he needs a job, so she called the book depository, they were looking for work. He got the job at the school book depository. She has no connection to the CIA, she has no connection to the Russians, she has no connection to the mob. It's incredible that he got this job at the school book depository.
Well, when you said that, what you're implying is that when I say conspiracy, I'm implying everyone, everywhere, and that's not what I'm trying to imply. What conspiracy is defined as is two people.
And I mean the same thing. So
Yeah.
I would say that,
So how would it be so much more complex for two people together to decide to shoot the president than for one person? I just don't think that's logically accurate.
Okay, let's move on to the next topic.